She thought love was enough. She was wrong. Margaret stood in the marble foyer of what used to be her dream home, holding a single cardboard box containing 18 years of memories. The house echoed differently now, hollow, like it knew it had been stolen. Her stepdaughter, Emma, stood by the grand staircase, arms crossed, wearing a designer dress that cost more than Margaret's monthly pension. "The movers will be here at 3, Emma said, not looking up from her phone. Her voice had that practiced coldness of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "Make sure you're gone by then." Margaret's hands trembled around the box. Inside were photo albums, birthday cards Emma had made her in elementary school, a Mother's Day mug that said "World's Best Stepmom" in crayon letters that had faded but never disappeared. "Emma, sweetheart, can we just talk about this?" Margaret's voice cracked. She'd raised this girl since she was 4 years old. Braided her hair for school pictures, stayed up all night when she had pneumonia, taught her to drive in this very driveway. Emma finally looked up, and Margaret saw something she'd never seen before in those green eyes. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. "There's nothing to talk about. The will was clear. Dad left everything to me. You were just the caretaker." The words hit like physical blows. Caretaker. Not mother. Not family. Just hired help who'd outlived her usefulness. Margaret had married Emma's father, Richard, when Emma was barely out of diapers. He'd been a widower, broken by grief, trying to raise a daughter who cried for a mother who'd never come home. Margaret hadn't planned to fall in love with either of them. But sometimes life doesn't ask permission. It just happens. One bedtime story at a time. One scraped knee at a time. One "I love you, Mama Margaret" at a time. Until suddenly, you realize you'd die for a child who doesn't share your blood but shares your heart. "I raised you," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast space. "I was there for every fever, every heartbreak, every—" "You were paid to be there," Emma interrupted. "Dad paid for everything. The house, the cars, your credit cards. You never worked a day while you lived here. Consider it back pay." Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. Not break. She'd been broken before. This was different. This was the sound of trust shattering into pieces so small they could never be put back together. She'd given up her career as a financial advisor to be a full-time mother. Richard had insisted. "Emma needs stability," he'd said. "She needs you home." Now that sacrifice was being weaponized against her. Margaret looked around the house one last time. The kitchen where she'd made thousands of meals. The living room where she'd helped with homework every night for 12 years. The piano where she'd sat through countless recitals, cheering louder than any biological mother ever could. "The lawyer said you have until 5 o'clock, Emma added, checking her Apple Watch. "After that, it's trespassing." Margaret nodded slowly. She understood now. This wasn't grief making Emma cruel. This wasn't even about money. This was about power. And Emma had just discovered she held all of it. But what Emma didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Margaret had power too. Hidden power. Secret power. The kind that comes from being underestimated your entire life. As Margaret walked toward the door, she made a mental note to call her lawyer. Not about the house. She'd already lost that battle. But about something else. Something Emma had no idea existed. Because 18 years ago, when Margaret married Richard, she'd done something smart. Something that would change everything. She'd kept her maiden name on one very important document. And that document was about to become Emma's worst nightmare. Let's go back to the beginning. Back to when Margaret thought she was just helping a broken man raise his daughter. Back to when love felt simple and trust felt safe. Back to 2006, when Margaret Chen was 34 years old and had just been promoted to senior financial advisor at Merrill Lynch in downtown Seattle. She was good at her job, really good. She could read market trends like other people read novels, and she had a client list that included tech executives, real estate moguls, and old Seattle money families who'd been rich since the lumber boom. She was making $300,000 a year, owned a condo in Belltown, and had a retirement plan that would make her a millionaire by 50. She was also completely alone, not by choice, but by circumstance. She'd been engaged once to a fellow advisor named David, but he'd left her for his secretary 3 weeks before their wedding. Classic story. Humiliating story. The kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about love and trust and whether you're the kind of person people stay for. That's when she met Richard Whitmore at a client dinner. He was there representing his family's construction company, trying to secure financing for a new development project. He was handsome in that weathered, reliable way that comes from working with your hands. Salt and pepper hair, laugh lines around blue eyes, and a wedding ring he still wore, even though his wife had been dead for 2 years. They talked about interest rates and market projections, but Margaret found herself watching the way he stirred his coffee, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he mentioned his daughter Emma, with a mixture of love and panic that made her chest tight. "She's 4, he said, showing Margaret a photo on his phone. "And she asks me every night when mommy's coming home." Margaret looked at the picture. A little girl with wild blonde curls and her father's blue eyes, wearing a princess dress and a gap-toothed smile. Something shifted in Margaret's chest. Not love, not yet, but recognition. She saw herself in that little girl. The confusion, the questions no one could answer, the way children adapt to loss by pretending it doesn't hurt. "What do you tell her?" Margaret asked. Richard's smile faded. "I tell her mommy's in heaven, but she's 4. Heaven might as well be the grocery store. She keeps asking when we're going to visit." Margaret reached across the table and touched his hand. Just for a second, just long enough to let him know he wasn't alone. That touch changed everything. 3 months later, Richard asked her to dinner, not a business dinner, a real one, with candles and wine and nervous laughter. 6 months after that, he asked her to meet Emma. Margaret spent 3 days picking out the perfect outfit, something that said, "I'm not trying to replace your mother, but also I care about you." Emma hid behind Richard's legs for the first hour. Then Margaret pulled out a small gift, not a toy, but a book. The Paper Bag Princess by Robert Munsch. It was about a princess who saves herself and doesn't need a prince. Emma's eyes lit up. "Will you read it to me?" she asked, and just like that, Margaret's heart was gone. They were married a year later in Richard's backyard, with Emma as the flower girl and Margaret's parents flying in from San Francisco to witness their daughter marry a man they'd never met, but trusted because they could see the happiness in her eyes. It was a small wedding, intimate, perfect. Emma called her Mama Margaret from day one, and Margaret thought that was the most beautiful sound in the world. Richard insisted Margaret quit her job. "Emma needs stability," he said. "She's been through enough changes. She needs someone home when she gets off the school bus. Someone who can be there for every soccer game and school play and parent-teacher conference." Margaret hesitated. She loved her career. She was good at it. But she looked at Emma, who was 6 now, and still sometimes woke up crying for her biological mother. And she made the choice that felt right. She quit Merrill Lynch, sold her condo, moved into Richard's house in Bellevue with its big backyard and white picket fence and room for a family to grow. She threw herself into motherhood with the same intensity she'd once reserved for market analysis. PTA meetings, soccer practice, piano lessons, birthday parties with homemade cakes and Pinterest-worthy decorations. Emma thrived. Her grades improved. She made friends. She stopped having nightmares about her biological mother. She started calling Margaret Mom without the qualifier. Margaret thought she'd found her purpose. She thought love was enough. She thought family was about choice, not blood. But she also did something else. Something she never told Richard about. Something that seemed unimportant at the time, but would become the most important decision of her life. She kept one account in her maiden name, her old 401k from Merrill Lynch. It wasn't much, about $50,000, but it was hers, her safety net, her independence. She also kept her financial advisor license active, just in case. She told herself it was professional pride, but deep down, she knew it was something else. It was the part of her that remembered what it felt like to be left 3 weeks before a wedding. The part that whispered, "What if this doesn't last? What if love isn't enough?" For 12 years, it seemed like paranoia. Richard was a good husband, a good father. He provided for them, loved them, built a life that felt solid and safe. Emma grew from a scared little girl into a confident teenager. She made honor roll, got into Stanford, had boyfriends and heartbreaks and all the normal drama of growing up. Margaret was there for all of it. Every triumph, every crisis, every moment that mattered. She was the one Emma called when she got her first period, the one who taught her to parallel park, the one who stayed up all night helping her write college application essays. She was Emma's mother in every way that mattered. But blood, as it turns out, matters more than love, at least to some people. Richard died suddenly of a heart attack when Emma was a sophomore at Stanford. He was only 52, healthy, active, no warning signs. One day he was coaching Emma's old soccer team as a volunteer. The next day, he was gone. Margaret was devastated, not just by the loss, but by the sudden realization that she'd built her entire identity around being a wife and mother, and now half of that was gone. Emma came home from college for the funeral, and they grieved together. Or so Margaret thought. The will reading was a formality. Richard had always said everything would go to Emma when she turned 25, with Margaret as the trustee until then. It made sense. Emma was his biological daughter. Margaret had her own savings, her own retirement account. She didn't need Richard's money. She just needed to keep being Emma's mother. But the will had been changed. Recently, without Margaret's knowledge. Everything, the house, the business, the investments, even Richard's life insurance, went directly to Emma. No trust, no waiting until 25, and no provision for Margaret. Not even a mention of her name. "There must be a mistake," Margaret said to the lawyer. Emma sat beside her, holding her hand, looking as shocked as Margaret felt. "Dad always said." The lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, shook his head. The will was updated 6 months ago. Mr. Whitmore was very specific about his intentions. 6 months ago, right around the time Richard had been acting strange, working late, taking phone calls in private. Margaret had assumed it was stress from the business. She never imagined he was planning to cut her out of their life entirely. "Don't worry, Mom," Emma said, squeezing Margaret's hand. "We'll figure this out. The house is big enough for both of us. And your family, you'll always be family." Margaret believed her. Why wouldn't she? This was the girl she'd raised, the girl who'd called her mom for 12 years, the girl she'd sacrificed her career for. But Emma was 20 years old and had just inherited $3.2 million. And money, as Margaret knew from her years as a financial advisor, changes people. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. Emma started spending. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, a new BMW. She dropped out of Stanford to focus on managing her inheritance. Margaret tried to talk to her about budgeting, about finishing school, about making smart financial decisions. But Emma didn't want advice. She wanted freedom. And Margaret, who had no legal claim to anything, had no power to stop her. The first fight was about the credit cards. Emma had canceled all of Margaret's cards without warning. "You need to learn to live within your means," Emma said. "Dad spoiled you. It's time to be independent." Margaret's means were a $1,200 monthly Social Security check. She'd given up her career, her earning potential, her financial independence to raise Emma. And now Emma was treating her like a freeloader. The second fight was about the house. Emma wanted to renovate, gut the kitchen where Margaret had cooked thousands of meals, tear down the wall between the living room and dining room where they'd celebrated every holiday. "It's my house now," Emma said when Margaret protested. "I can do whatever I want with it." The third fight was about Margaret's room. Emma wanted to convert it into a home office. "You can use the guest room," she said. "It's smaller, but you don't need much space." Margaret realized she was being erased, slowly, systematically, from the life she'd built. But the final straw came when Margaret found the real estate listing. Emma was selling the house. Their house. The house where Margaret had raised her, where Richard had proposed, where they'd been a family. "I need the capital," Emma explained. "I'm starting an investment firm. This house is just dead money sitting here." Dead money. That's what their home had become. That's what Margaret had become. A liability to be managed, an expense to be cut. Emma gave her 30 days to find somewhere else to live. "I'll help with the deposit," she said, as if that made it generous instead of cruel. Margaret packed her life into boxes, watching 18 years disappear into cardboard containers. She found apartments she could afford on Social Security, small, dark places in neighborhoods where she didn't know anyone. She felt like she was 34 again, starting over after David left her. Except this time, she was 52 and had no career to fall back on. That's when she remembered the account, the one she'd kept in her maiden name, the safety net she'd hoped she'd never need. She called her old bank, expecting to find maybe $75,000 after 18 years of compound interest. Enough for a down payment on a small condo, enough to start over. The balance was $12.3 million. Margaret stared at the number on her phone screen, certain there'd been a mistake. She called the bank again, then again. Each time, the number was the same. $12,347,892.33. She'd forgotten about the stock options. The Merrill Lynch stock options that had vested right before she quit. Stock that had split 3 times and grown exponentially as the company was acquired and merged and acquired again. She'd been a millionaire for years and never knew it. While she was clipping coupons and asking Emma for grocery money, she had more money than Emma could spend in a lifetime. While Emma was treating her like a burden, Margaret could have bought and sold Emma's inheritance 4 times over. Margaret sat in her car outside the bank, laughing until she cried. Or maybe crying until she laughed. The irony was too perfect, too cruel, too beautiful. Emma had kicked her out for being poor, but Margaret wasn't poor. She was rich, richer than Emma could imagine. But she was also something else. She was angry. For the first time in her life, Margaret Chen was furious. Not sad, not hurt, not disappointed. Angry. The kind of anger that burns clean and bright and doesn't go out until justice is served. Margaret drove to the most expensive hotel in Seattle and booked the penthouse suite. She ordered room service, lobster and champagne and chocolate cake. Because she could. Because she was done being careful with money. Done being grateful for scraps. Done being treated like she didn't matter. Then she called her old boss at Merrill Lynch. "Margaret Chen," she said when he answered. "I know it's been 18 years, but I need a favor. I need the best lawyer in Seattle. Money is no object." Her boss, who tried to talk her out of quitting all those years ago, didn't ask questions. He just gave her a name, David Kim, the lawyer who'd made headlines for taking down tech executives and corrupt politicians. Margaret called David Kim's office. His secretary said he was booked for months. "Tell him Margaret Chen is calling," Margaret said. "Tell him I have $12 million and a very interesting case." David Kim called her back in 10 minutes. They met the next morning in his corner office overlooking Elliott Bay. Margaret told him everything. The marriage, the adoption that never happened because Richard said it wasn't necessary, the will that cut her out, Emma's cruelty, her own hidden fortune. "What do you want?" David asked when she finished. Margaret looked out at the water, thinking about the girl she'd raised, the girl who called her mom, the girl who'd thrown her away like garbage. "I want Emma to understand what she's lost," Margaret said. "I want her to know what real power looks like." David smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark who just smelled blood in the water. "I think we can arrange that." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Margaret would buy Emma's debt, all of it. The credit cards Emma had maxed out, the business loans for her investment firm, the mortgage on the new condo Emma had bought with the house money. It took 3 months and cost Margaret $2.8 million. But suddenly, Emma owed everything to a shell company controlled by Margaret. Every payment, every interest charge, every late fee. Margaret owned Emma's financial life, and Emma had no idea. The first sign of trouble came when Emma's credit cards were declined. Then her business loan was called in early. Then her mortgage payment was rejected. Emma called Margaret, panicked. "Something's wrong with my accounts," she said. "The bank says there's been some kind of transfer." "But I don't understand." "That sounds stressful," Margaret said calmly. She was sitting in her penthouse suite, looking out at the city she'd conquered. "Have you tried calling a financial advisor?" The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Emma had thrown away the best financial advisor she'd ever known. Emma's investment firm collapsed within a week. Her clients pulled their money. Her employees quit. Her business partner sued her for fraud. Emma was 22 years old and facing bankruptcy. She called Margaret again, crying this time. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "I'm going to lose everything." "Everything?" Margaret asked. "That's a strong word. You still have your health, your youth, your education, if you choose to finish it. You have everything I had when your father died, and you threw me out." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, "Mom, Did I what, Emma? Did you do this to me?" Margaret considered lying. It would be easier, kinder. But kindness was what had gotten her thrown out of her own home. "Yes," she said simply. "I did." Emma's voice changed. The tears stopped. The panic was replaced by something harder. "You're supposed to love me unconditionally. You're supposed to be my mother." "I was your mother," Margaret said. "For 18 years, I was your mother. I loved you unconditionally. I sacrificed everything for you, and you repaid me by calling me a caretaker and throwing me out like trash." "I was grieving," Emma shouted. "Dad had just died. I wasn't thinking clearly." "You had 2 years to think clearly," Margaret replied. 2 years to remember who raised you, who loved you, who gave up everything for you. Instead, you chose cruelty. You chose to hurt the one person who would have died for you." Emma was crying again. "Please," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please don't do this. You're all the family I have left." Margaret closed her eyes. For a moment, she was back in Emma's bedroom, reading The Paper Bag Princess for the 100th time. For a moment, she remembered what it felt like to love this girl more than her own life. But then she remembered the coldness in Emma's eyes, the way she'd called her a caretaker, the way she'd been erased from the only home she'd known. "Family doesn't throw family away," Margaret said. "You taught me that. Now I'm teaching you what it feels like." Margaret hung up. Emma called back 17 times. Margaret didn't answer. She had one more call to make. To the real estate agent handling Emma's condo. "I'd like to make an offer," she said. Cash, full asking price. But I have one condition. The current owner needs to be out by the end of the week. Emma was evicted on a Tuesday. Margaret watched from across the street as the movers loaded Emma's belongings into a truck. Emma looked smaller somehow, younger, like the scared little girl Margaret had first met all those years ago. For a moment, Margaret's resolve wavered. Then Emma's phone rang. Margaret could hear her voice carrying across the street. "No, I can't pay you back yet," Emma was saying. "I just need more time." She was talking to someone she owed money to. Someone who wasn't as patient as Margaret had been. Someone who might not stop at financial ruin. Margaret realized Emma was in real danger. The kind of danger that comes from owing money to the wrong people. The kind of danger that could get a young woman hurt, or worse. Margaret had wanted to teach Emma a lesson, not get her killed. She called David Kim. "I want to make Emma an offer," she said. "A way out." "What kind of offer?" "Full debt forgiveness, clean slate, but she has to earn it." David was quiet for a moment. "What do you have in mind?" Margaret's offer was simple. Emma could have her life back, her credit restored, her debts forgiven, even a trust fund to ensure she'd never be poor again. But she had to do 3 things. First, she had to finish college. Second, she had to work for a year at a nonprofit helping homeless women. Third, she had to write a letter of apology, not just to Margaret, but to herself, an acknowledgement of what she'd lost when she chose cruelty over love. Emma read the offer in the lobby of a cheap motel where she'd been staying since the eviction. Her hands shook as she turned the pages. At the bottom was a note in Margaret's handwriting. "Love isn't conditional, but respect is earned. You can have both back, but only if you remember who you used to be." Emma called Margaret that night. "I'll do it," she said. "All of it, whatever you want." "I don't want your compliance," Margaret replied. "I want your understanding. I want you to know what you threw away. I want you to become the woman I raised you to be." Emma went back to Stanford. She studied harder than she ever had before, driven by something she'd never felt before, the fear of losing everything again. She graduated summa cum laude with a degree in social work. She spent a year working at a shelter for women who'd been abandoned by their families. Women like Margaret. Women like herself. The letter took her 6 months to write. She went through dozens of drafts, trying to find words for the magnitude of what she'd done. How do you apologize for throwing away a mother's love? How do you ask forgiveness for cruelty that can't be undone? In the end, the letter was simple. "I threw away the most precious thing in my life because I thought I was entitled to more. I hurt the person who loved me most because I could. I became someone you didn't raise me to be, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I'm sorry for the love I wasted. I'm sorry for forgetting that family is about choice, not blood. You chose me when no one else would. You loved me when I was unlovable. You were my mother in every way that mattered, and I threw that away for money and pride. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I remember now. I remember who I used to be when I was yours." Margaret read the letter in her penthouse suite, tears streaming down her face. It was everything she'd wanted to hear, and nothing she'd expected to feel. The anger was gone, replaced by something more complicated. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Emma had learned what Margaret had tried to teach her, that love is a choice, that family is earned, that some things once broken can never be fully repaired. Margaret kept her promise. Emma's debts were forgiven. Her credit was restored. A trust fund was established, not enough to make her rich, but enough to ensure she'd never be desperate again. But Margaret didn't call, didn't visit, didn't try to rebuild what had been destroyed, because some lessons are permanent. Some consequences can't be undone. Emma had learned what it meant to lose everything, but she'd also learned something else. She'd learned that actions have consequences, that cruelty has a price, that love, once thrown away, doesn't always come back. Margaret moved to San Francisco to be closer to her aging parents. She bought a house in Pacific Heights with a view of the bay. She started a foundation for women over 50 who'd been financially abandoned by their families. She called it Second Chances, because everyone deserves one, even Emma. But second chances don't erase first mistakes. They don't undo the damage or heal all wounds. They just give you the opportunity to do better, to be better, to remember that love is precious because it can be lost. Emma sent Margaret a Christmas card every year. Just a simple card with a simple message. Thank you for teaching me what love costs. I'm still learning to be worthy of it. Margaret kept the cards in a box in her closet. She never responded, but she never threw them away either. Because love, real love, doesn't disappear just because it's been betrayed. It changes. It becomes more careful, more guarded. But it doesn't die. Margaret still loved Emma. She always would. But she loved herself more now. And that perhaps was the most important lesson of all. 5 years later, Margaret was at a coffee shop in Union Square when she saw her. Emma, older now, wearing scrubs and a tired smile. She was with a group of women who looked like they'd been through hell. The kind of women Margaret's foundation helped every day. Emma was listening to one of them, holding her hand, offering the kind of comfort that can only come from someone who's been broken and rebuilt. Their eyes met across the crowded cafe. Emma's face went white, then red, then something like hopeful. She said something to her group and started walking toward Margaret's table. Margaret's first instinct was to leave, to avoid the confrontation, to protect the peace she'd built. But she stayed, because running away wasn't who she was anymore. Emma stopped a few feet from the table, uncertain. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," Margaret replied. They looked at each other for a long moment, seeing the changes time had made. Emma looked older, more serious. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of hard-won wisdom. Margaret looked peaceful, content in a way she'd never been before. "I work at the shelter now," Emma said. "Full-time. I help women who've lost their families." Margaret nodded. She'd known. She'd been quietly funding Emma's salary for 3 years. "It's good work," Margaret said. "Important work." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I think about you every day," she whispered. "I think about what I lost, what I threw away. I think about the woman who raised me and how I repaid her love with cruelty." Margaret's chest tightened. "Emma? No, please, let me say this. I need to say this." Emma took a shaky breath. "You were my mother, not because you had to be, but because you chose to be. You loved me when I was unlovable. You sacrificed everything for me. And I threw it away because I thought I was entitled to more. I thought blood mattered more than love. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Margaret felt the familiar sting of tears. "You were young," she said softly. "You were grieving. People do terrible things when they're in pain." Emma shook her head. "That's not an excuse. That's just an explanation. I hurt you because I could, because I knew you'd take it, because I knew you loved me enough to forgive anything. I used your love against you." "Yes," Margaret said simply. "You did." The honesty hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't change anything. I know it doesn't fix what I broke, but I'm sorry." Margaret looked at this woman who'd once been her daughter, who'd called her mom for 12 years, who'd broken her heart so completely she'd thought it would never heal. "I know you are," she said, "and I forgive you." Emma's face crumpled. "You do? I forgive you." Margaret repeated, "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean going back. It just means I'm not carrying the anger anymore. It was too heavy. It was hurting me more than it was hurting you." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I don't expect, I don't deserve." "You deserve to be happy," Margaret said. "You deserve to build a life that matters. You deserve to love and be loved, but you don't get to have me back. That person, the mother who would have died for you, she's gone. You killed her when you threw me away." The words were harsh but not cruel. They were simply true. Emma had destroyed something precious, and some things, once broken, can't be repaired. They can only be mourned and learned from. "I know," Emma said quietly. "I know she's gone. I killed her. I killed the best thing in my life because I was selfish and stupid and cruel. I have to live with that. I will live with that. But I want you to know, I want her to know, that I remember her. I remember how much she loved me. I remember what she sacrificed. I remember what I lost." Margaret reached across the table and touched Emma's hand, just for a moment, just long enough to say goodbye to the girl she'd raised. "She knows," Margaret said. "She forgives you too. But she's gone, Emma. Let her rest." Emma squeezed Margaret's hand once, then let go. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for raising me, for loving me, for teaching me what love costs, for showing me what I lost, for giving me the chance to become someone better." Margaret smiled. It was sad but genuine. "You're welcome." Emma stood to leave, then paused. "The women at the shelter," she said, "they ask me sometimes how I know what they're going through, how I understand what it feels like to lose everything. I tell them I had a mother once, a real mother, and I threw her away. I tell them that some mistakes can't be undone, but they can be learned from. I tell them that love is precious because it can be lost." "That's a good lesson," Margaret said. "A hard one, but a good one." Emma nodded. "I learned it from the best teacher I ever had." She walked away then, back to her group of broken women who were learning to rebuild their lives. Margaret watched her go, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness. That would come later, in small moments with new people who earned her trust slowly and carefully. But peace. Margaret finished her coffee and walked out into the San Francisco sunshine. She had a foundation to run, women to help, a life to live. A life built on the ashes of the one Emma had burned down. A life that was smaller but stronger, more careful but more authentic. She thought about the girl she'd raised, the woman Emma had become, the mother Margaret had been and would never be again. Some stories don't have happy endings. They just have true ones. And the truth was this: love is not enough. Love without respect is just enabling. Love without boundaries is just weakness. Love without consequences is just fantasy. Margaret had learned to love herself more than she loved Emma, and that, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all. Because you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You can't love someone into being worthy of that love. You can only love them enough to let them go when they choose to leave. Emma had chosen to leave. Margaret had chosen to let her. And in that choice, they both found something they'd been looking for. Emma had found redemption. Margaret had found herself. It wasn't the ending either of them had wanted, but it was the ending they'd earned. Margaret walked home to her house with the view of the bay, where she lived alone but not lonely, where she helped other women rebuild their lives after betrayal, where she'd learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to stop loving someone who doesn't love you back. And if that sounds harsh, remember this: Margaret had given Emma everything. Her career, her independence, her heart, her life. She'd loved unconditionally for 18 years. She'd sacrificed everything for a child who wasn't even hers by blood. And Emma had repaid that love by calling her a caretaker and throwing her away like garbage. Some people deserve second chances. Some people deserve forgiveness. Some people deserve love that never gives up, but everyone deserves to be loved by someone who loves themselves first. And Margaret had finally learned to be that someone. The last time Margaret saw Emma was at a conference for social workers. Emma was giving a presentation about helping women who'd been abandoned by their families. She spoke with passion and knowledge and hard-won wisdom about the trauma of betrayal, a long road to healing, the importance of rebuilding trust slowly and carefully. Margaret sat in the back of the room, watching the woman Emma had become. She was good at her job, really good. She understood her clients because she'd been where they were. She'd lost everything and learned to rebuild. She'd made terrible mistakes and learned to live with the consequences. After the presentation, Emma saw Margaret in the crowd. Their eyes met for just a moment. Emma smiled, not the desperate, pleading smile of someone asking for forgiveness, but the quiet, grateful smile of someone who'd learned to forgive herself. Margaret smiled back, not the smile of a mother for her daughter, but the smile of one professional for another, one survivor for another. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had been said in that coffee shop 5 years earlier. This was just acknowledgement, recognition. Two women who'd survived the wreckage of their relationship and built something meaningful from the pieces. Margaret left the conference feeling something she hadn't expected: pride. Not the pride of a mother watching her daughter succeed. That woman was gone, buried under years of betrayal and hard-won wisdom. But the pride of a teacher watching a student apply a difficult lesson. Emma had learned what Margaret had tried to teach her: that love has a price, that family is earned, that some mistakes can't be undone, only learned from. Margaret drove home to her house by the bay, where she lived a life that was smaller but stronger than the one she lost. She had friends now, women who'd earned her trust slowly and carefully. She had work that mattered, helping other women rebuild after betrayal. She had peace, the kind that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to accept less. She also had money, more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. Money that had given her power when she needed it most. Money that had taught Emma the hardest lesson of her life. Money that now funded second chances for women who'd been thrown away by the people who were supposed to love them. But the money wasn't the real power. The real power was in the choice. The choice to love herself more than she loved someone who hurt her. The choice to build a new life instead of mourning the old one forever. The choice to help other women make the same choice. Margaret's foundation had helped over 3,000 women in 5 years. Women who'd been abandoned by their children, their spouses, their families. Women who'd given everything and received nothing in return. Women who'd learned, like Margaret, that love is not enough, that respect must be earned, that some relationships can't be saved, only survived. Each woman who walked through Margaret's doors saw something in her eyes that gave them hope. Not the hope of reconciliation, that was often impossible, but the hope of rebuilding, the hope of finding worth beyond the people who'd thrown them away, the hope of learning to love themselves first. Margaret's story became legend in certain circles. The woman who'd been thrown away by her stepdaughter and came back with $12 million and a lesson in consequences. The woman who'd turned betrayal into power, heartbreak into purpose, abandonment into advocacy. But Margaret didn't think of herself as legendary. She thought of herself as lucky. Lucky to have had the resources to fight back. Lucky to have learned her worth before it was too late. Lucky to have found a purpose bigger than her pain. Not everyone gets that chance. Not everyone has a secret fortune to fall back on. Not everyone has the strength to rebuild after betrayal. Margaret knew that. That's why she used her story, her money, her hard-won wisdom to help women who weren't as lucky as she'd been. Because the real lesson of Margaret's story isn't about money or revenge or even justice. It's about choice. The choice to define your worth by your own standards, not by how others treat you. The choice to build a life that matters, even after the life you planned is destroyed. The choice to love yourself enough to walk away from people who don't love you back. Emma learned that lesson too, in her own way. She learned it by losing everything and having to rebuild from nothing. She learned it by facing the consequences of her choices. She learned it by becoming someone who helps other people make better choices than she did. Their story doesn't have a happy ending in the traditional sense. They didn't reconcile. They didn't become a family again. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too complete. But they both found something better than happiness. They found peace. They found purpose. They found themselves. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for. To survive our mistakes, to learn from our pain, to build something meaningful from the wreckage of our broken relationships, to love ourselves enough to demand better, to be strong enough to walk away when love isn't enough. Margaret's house by the bay has a plaque by the front door. It reads, "Love is not enough. Respect is required. Boundaries are sacred. Worth is not negotiable." It's a reminder to herself and a warning to others, a declaration of independence from the woman who used to accept crumbs and call it love. Emma has a similar plaque in her office at the shelter. It reads, "Some mistakes can't be undone, only learned from. Some relationships can't be saved, only survived. Some love can't be earned back, only remembered." It's her reminder of what she lost and why she lost it. Her commitment to helping others avoid her mistakes. They live in the same city now, but they might as well be on different planets. They move in different circles, help different people, carry different scars. But they're connected by the lesson they learned together. That love without respect is just enabling. That family is about choice, not blood. That some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Margaret is 70 now. Her hair is silver, her hands are lined, but her eyes are clear and strong. She's never remarried, never had biological children, never tried to replace what she lost with Emma. She's built something different instead, something that belongs entirely to her. Emma is 40. She's married to a social worker she met at the shelter, a man who understands that some wounds never fully heal, but can be transformed into wisdom. They have 2 children, a boy and a girl, who will grow up knowing that love is precious because it can be lost, that family is earned, not given, that respect is not optional. Emma tells her children about Margaret sometimes, not as their grandmother. That title was forfeited long ago, but as the woman who taught her the most important lesson of her life, that actions have consequences, that love has limits, that some mistakes cost everything. Margaret doesn't know about Emma's children, doesn't know about her marriage, her continued work at the shelter, her quiet life of service and redemption. They exist in each other's past now, not their present, and that's as it should be. Some stories end with separation, not reconciliation. Some love survives by letting go. But if you asked Margaret whether she regretted any of it, the 18 years of motherhood, the betrayal, the financial warfare, the hard lessons taught and learned, she would say no, because all of it led her to who she is now, a woman who knows her worth, a woman who demands respect, a woman who helps other women do the same. And if you asked Emma the same question, she would give the same answer. Because losing Margaret taught her what love costs. Losing everything taught her what matters. Losing the best mother she ever had taught her how to be a better mother to her own children. Their story is a tragedy and a triumph, a cautionary tale and an inspiration, a reminder that love is not enough and proof that it's still worth fighting for. Not the desperate, enabling love that accepts anything, but the strong, self-respecting love that demands better. Margaret's foundation continues to grow. Her story continues to inspire. Her lesson continues to spread, that you can love someone completely and still walk away when they don't love you back. That you can forgive someone fully and still refuse to let them hurt you again. That you can be a mother to someone who will never be your daughter. Emma's work continues too. Her clients continue to heal. Her children continue to learn that love is precious, family is earned, and respect is required. She carries Margaret's lessons forward, not as penance, but as purpose, not as guilt, but as gratitude for the hardest teacher she ever had. And somewhere in San Francisco, in a house by the bay, Margaret sits on her deck, watching the sunset paint the water gold. She thinks about the girl she raised, the woman Emma became, the mother she used to be. She feels no anger now, no regret, no longing for what was lost. She feels proud of the lesson she taught, proud of the woman she became, proud of the life she built from the ashes of the one that was taken from her. She raised Emma to be strong, independent, capable of surviving anything. And in the end, that's exactly what Emma became, just not in the way either of them expected. Margaret's phone buzzes, a text from one of the women at her foundation. A woman who'd been thrown away by her own daughter and found the strength to rebuild. "Thank you," the text reads, "for showing me that I'm worth more than their cruelty, for teaching me to love myself first, for proving that we can survive anything." Margaret smiles and puts the phone away. This is her legacy now, not the daughter who threw her away, but the hundreds of women who learned to throw away the people who didn't value them. Not the family she lost, but the community she built. Not the love that was wasted, but the love that was earned. The sun sets over San Francisco Bay, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Margaret watches until the last light fades, then goes inside to her house that belongs entirely to her. To her life that belongs entirely to her peace that no one can take away. Because that's the real lesson of Margaret's story. Not that love conquers all, it doesn't. Not that family is forever, it isn't. Not that forgiveness heals everything, it can't. But that you can survive the loss of everything you thought mattered, and discover that what really matters is how you choose to rebuild. Margaret chose to rebuild with strength instead of bitterness, with purpose instead of revenge, with love for herself instead of desperate love for someone who didn't love her back. And in that choice, she found something better than the family she lost. She found herself. Emma made a different choice. She chose to rebuild with humility instead of pride, with service instead of selfishness, with gratitude for the lesson instead of resentment for the teacher. And in that choice, she found something better than the mother she lost. She found the mother she could become. Their stories diverged the day Emma threw Margaret away, but they're connected still by the lesson they learned together. That love is not enough, but it's still worth fighting for. That family is not about blood, but about choice. That some relationships can't be saved, but the people in them can be. And if that's not a happy ending, it's at least a true one. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to stop loving someone who doesn't love you back. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes the best lesson you can teach is that actions have consequences. Margaret taught Emma that lesson with $12 million and a broken heart. Emma learned it with everything she lost and everything she gained. And now they both teach it to others, in their own ways, in their own worlds, with their own hard-won wisdom. Because that's what survivors do. They take their pain and turn it into purpose. They take their lessons and share them with others. They take their broken hearts and use them to heal the world, one person at a time. Margaret's story ends where it began, with a choice. The choice to love herself more than she loved someone who hurt her. The choice to build a life that mattered more than the one she lost. The choice to be strong enough to walk away and wise enough to help others do the same. And Emma's story, it ends with a different choice. The choice to become worthy of the love she threw away. The choice to help others avoid her mistakes. The choice to be grateful for the hardest lesson she ever learned, even though it cost her everything. Two women, two choices, two different paths to the same destination. Peace. Not the peace of reconciliation, but the peace of resolution. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of understanding. Not the peace of going back, but the peace of moving forward. If this story has taught you anything, let it be this. You are worth more than someone else's crumbs. You deserve more than conditional love. You have the right to walk away from people who don't value you, even if you love them, even if they're family, even if it breaks your heart. Because love is not enough. Respect is required. Boundaries are sacred. Worth is not negotiable. And sometimes the greatest act of love, for yourself and for them, is knowing when to let go. Margaret learned that lesson at 52, when she thought her life was over. Emma learned it at 22, when she thought she had all the power. Both of them learned it the hard way, through loss and pain and consequences that couldn't be undone. But they learned it, and in learning it, they found something better than what they lost. They found themselves. They found their worth. They found their peace. And maybe in the end, that's enough. Maybe that's everything. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own struggles with love and loss and learning to value yourself, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because we all deserve to be loved by people who choose us every day. We all deserve respect along with love. We all deserve to know our worth. And remember, real love doesn't diminish you. Real family doesn't throw you away. Real relationships are built on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. You are worth more than someone else's leftovers. You deserve better than conditional love. You have the power to walk away from anyone who doesn't see your value, even if it breaks your heart, even if they're family, even if you love them more than life itself. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is loving yourself enough to demand better.